En esta ocasión tenemos la presentación. Estamos muy contentos como programa de tener a David Overend, quien es profesor de Drama and Performance Studies en la Universidad de Edimburgo. Como director, además, ha trabajado para diversos teatros, incluyendo el National Theatre del Reino Unido, y ha tenido diversas giras internacionales. Su trabajo incluye prácticas colaborativas en términos de interdisciplina y sus cruces con la práctica artística, como publicaciones en performance, geografías culturales y teatro. Su charla de hoy, Fireworks, Interdisciplinary Artistic Research, cuestiona los límites disciplinares en base a la noción de campo en tanto disciplina, como también en su sentido literal. Cruzando intereses en ecología y medio ambiente, propone nuevas definiciones basadas en un proyecto de prácticas artísticas situadas y colaborativas, desarrollada en los últimos años en el sur del Reino Unido, dialogando entre teatro, performance y ciencias como la geología y los estudios. Finalmente, estamos muy agradecidos de tener esta presentación, y como pensamos que esta instancia promueve el conocimiento de investigaciones, vamos a tener una ronda de preguntas al final, que les pido por favor vayan pidiendo su turno a través de el chat. Y ahí vamos a tener ese espacio. Así que dejo con ustedes a David y le vuelvo a agradecer por este encuentro.
Okay, so I'll just see if I can share my screen. There we go. Thank you very much for having me. So this paper is about working within, across, and between fields. I'm interested in fields in at least 3 different senses. First, fields as categories of disciplinarity. We talk about performance studies or geography or quaternary science as academic fields, and that usually denotes groupings of distinct methodologies, subjects, and knowledge practices. We organize and conduct our work in fields because it helps us to focus our attention and to develop new ideas within established networks and communities. Second, we go on field trips to field sites to conduct field work. That usually means that we leave the academy and go out into the real world. Outside the artificially constructed scientific laboratory, we encounter our subjects on unpredictable journeys through uncontrollable environments. In relation to these first 2 conceptualizations of fields, I believe that there is great potential for artistic research to intervene in these places in productive and generative ways. This paper will therefore explore the ways in which academic fields operate, reflect on an example of my own interdisciplinary artistic practice and field work at a specific field site, and offer some conclusions about interdisciplinary artistic research that I hope might usefully inform your own projects. The example that I'm going to discuss takes place in a 3rd type of field, the literal fields of Knepp Castle Estate, a large private enclosure in the south of England, which practices an experimental approach to farming and wildlife conservation. Knepp is an example of a specific version of rewilding, an approach to nature conservation that is gaining global prominence in scientific and policy circles and in popular culture. Rewilding constitutes a movement in conservation towards ecological processes, especially predation, grazing, succession, dispersion, and decomposition. Engaging with these processes, I am concerned with the potential of rewilding as a model for artistic research. My aim is to identify, perform, and assert wild presences and unruly processes in order to playfully challenge the organizational imperatives of bounded space. In undertaking such work, researchers from multiple disciplines might reimagine the ways that they encounter and engage with their own fields of knowledge. This work therefore takes a more than metaphorical approach to explore the centrality and significance of the agricultural enclosure in relation to the emergence of academic fields. It asks how time spent in one type of space, agricultural, pastoral, or arable, might inform our understanding of another, academic, conceptual, institutional. To explore these concerns in the field, a series of research trips were undertaken in the United Kingdom between 2017 and 2020, including repeated visits to NEP. This location was chosen due to its engagement with experimental models of ecosystem management, including the reintroduction of wild species such as beavers, pigs, and large herbivores alongside more traditional farming methods. This was an opportunity to work in fields that were already changing and opening up to new ecologies. Our core research team included 2 performance researchers, a geographer and a quaternary scientist. We were also joined at various points by others working in cognate areas, including ecologists, conservationists, educators, guides, landowners and farmers, musicians, writers, theatre makers, and visual and live artists. Over the course of this ongoing project, approximately 30 people have joined us at various points during several short visits and 4 weekend workshops. This is a dynamic, evolving network of collaborators working in different contexts, entering into new configurations and interdisciplinary exchanges. Working in unruly and unpredictable environments has also required us to develop multi-species methods that have engaged with and contributed to the ecological assemblages that are present at our chosen field sites. Our methodology combines approaches to place writing, collaborative performance making, and site-specific art in order to prompt playful and creative ways of working in response to the ecologies, conceptualizations, and performances of these field sites. Initially, we invited participants to explore the area, sometimes led by ecologists, sometimes by artists, and sometimes guided by their own instincts and interests. We then facilitated a slow, tentative, and small-scale process of artistic experimentation, resulting in fragments of text, performance, sculpture, and drawings. With a sensitivity to the existing environment and an openness to the co-presence of other inhabitants of the sites, we finally brought these disparate pieces together into temporary and contingent groupings, curating readings and performances, movements through installations of artworks, and digital repositories. Importantly, while many of these outputs have been documented and will serve to illustrate important aspects of our work, our most valuable insights were derived from the process of making together in these sites. The primary aim is not the creation of artworks, it is new ways of understanding the sites that emerge from working collaboratively and creatively. It's important to say that these working methods aspire to a genuine transdisciplinarity, in which knowledge is no longer limited to constituent parts of a research process, but rather emerges through a radical openness to their convergence. As our collaborator, Baz Kershaw, has asserted, the value of working in such spaces is that you are entering into a relationship with your surroundings that potentially leaves you more open to the forces, energies, and so forth that are circulating there. This requires a process of unlearning and an embrace of the condition of not knowing certain things. This is not to argue for the dissolution of fields, although that may have its value in certain contexts. But there are fields and there are fields. Borders can be impermeable or porous. Edges can be fixed or blurred. When we talk about fields in academic contexts, we're really talking about cordoning off distinct areas of knowledge and understanding. There are plenty of good reasons to do this. Within clearly defined parameters, expertise can be nurtured, ideas can be organized and effectively disseminated, and precarious methodologies and subjects can be protected. Fields per se are not a bad thing, but there are also significant problems with organizing knowledge in this way. Ideologies become entrenched, research takes place in esoteric silos, and working methods can be limited and inflexible. This is why the modern university has frequently sought to engender exchange and collaboration across departments. But while interdisciplinarity has become a buzzword in contemporary scholarship, the systems and structures of our institutions are not always open to the forms of innovation and collaboration that are necessary to move us beyond disciplinary boundaries. As Roberta Frank points out, the term discipline has a very different connotation to field. Unlike fields with their mud, cow, and corn, the Latinate discipline comes encased in stainless steel. It suggests something rigorous, aggressive, hazardous to master. If fields can be understood as muddy spaces, lacking in rigor and somehow less hazardous to control, they are also unequal and contested, the site of power struggles and unevenly distributed capital. Fields, in both senses, contain the quantifiable, the logical, and the graspable, but they also admit the uncanny, the irrational, and the unknown. This is in contradistinction to the hard-edged discipline, which usually controls or suppresses those forces. When research takes place in the field, this tends to refer to a place-based approach rather than the academic organization of knowledge. In the final decades of the 20th century, anthropologists such as George Marcus and Michael Fisher called for the reconfiguration of traditional methods of fieldwork, which tended to involve intensive participant observation in a single bounded location. Responding with multi-sited or multi-locale ethnography to a capitalist political economy, fieldwork was expanded to incorporate mobile studies of dispersed, multiple locations and routes. The aim was to adapt site-based research practices in response to a world system that was constituted through the circulation of cultural meanings, objects, and identities in diffuse time-space. This shift was influential across disciplines, including performance studies and the environmental humanities. And it's informed the design and practice of fieldwork in a variety of contexts. More recently, there has been a reappraisal of the tyranny of the multi-sited approach. In his defense of the bounded field site, Mate Candea argues for the avowal and acknowledgement of processes of bounding, selection, and choice, which can be obscured in studies that purport to follow everything. It is significant that Candea's essay ends with a call to recapture the value of not knowing certain things. This is referred to as a new experimental moment. Examining ambiguous definitions of experiment in environmentalism, two of my collaborators, Jamie Lorimer and Clemens Dreisen, proposed the concept of wild experiments to account for open-ended, uncertain, and political negotiations between people and wildlife. The field site for our own wild experiments has been selected with Candea's rapprochement in mind. Agricultural enclosures are quintessentially bounded field sites. Working within fields is an opportunity to contain research practice within a specific demarcated space. In this case, they are places where a deliberate attempt has been made to reintroduce wild processes. This provides an opportunity to focus a research inquiry. The processes of rewilding are central to our work here, and we constantly return to the question of what they can teach us about transdisciplinary artistic practice. However, importantly, bounding our work in this way does not preclude wider application. Candea argues that the arbitrary location allows one to reflect on and rethink conceptual entities to challenge their coherence and their totalizing aspirations. This is very much our intention here. And we approach NEP as a testing ground for the wider possibilities of rewilding knowledge exchange. I first visited NEP in July 2017 with my collaborators Jamie Lorimer and Danielle Shreve and the walking artist and researcher Phil Smith, whose work on mythogeography has been influential in shaping our methodology. We explored the estate on foot with the owners, Sir Charles Burrell and Isabella Tree, and heard the story of the Wildland Project, a version of the account that Tree has subsequently published in her book, Wilding. NEP is a former dairy farm, the fields of which have been gradually taken out of production in favour of a process-led, non-goal-orientated project where, as far as possible, nature takes the driving seat. Populations of hardy breeds of domesticated large herbivores, Old English longhorn cattle, and Exmoor ponies have been introduced alongside Tamworth pigs, and they're allowed to roam freely with non-native fallow deer and native roe and red deer. They are encouraged to generate a naturalistic grazing regime that fosters habitat change and has led to such unexpected outcomes as the only recovering populations of turtle doves in the UK, and over 30 species of butterflies, including the rare purple emperor. The ecological movement towards unruly processes and unpredictable outcomes has significantly informed my approach to artistic research. In October 2017, I arranged a return visit with a 16-strong multidisciplinary group. One of the performances that emerged from the creative workshop that we facilitated that weekend took place in a large field beside the campsite. Following a series of prompts towards collaborative performance making from the practitioner Karen Christopher, I took part in a group performance that tangled together diverse fragments of responses to the ecologies of the site. This moment is captured in this photograph. It's me sitting in the middle of a field, essentially pretending to be a stag. Another participant, Sarah Hopfinger, describes this performance in her blog post about the event. David is sitting on a chair at a distance from us. He is out there towards the field where there are grasses, hedges, horizon, and what I cannot fully see. His far-awayness feels important. David, sitting on his chair, faces us with a stare that arrests me closely, yet I cannot make out his expression or bodily position. He is not fully clear. I am drawn to this far-away, close David chair. He watches us watching him. After some time, he slowly brings his arms up towards his head, his hands carrying two long sticks that end up resting on his head and protruding out upward into the sky, echoing knowledge of long antlers. He does not change his continued looking at us, even as he is changed by this simple movement and collaboration with two sticks. Hopfinger's use of hyphenated descriptors, grasses, hedges, horizon, and what I cannot fully see, and far away, close David chair, which are employed throughout this post, gently challenge the autonomy of objects and bodies in this field. In positioning myself in the middle of the field, I was aiming for a distance from the locus of human activity, the actions of the wider group performance. At the same time, I wanted to play with representation, loosely imitating a stag that I had encountered earlier that day. Hopfinger detects an openness to partiality in this David Stag performance, which is to understand my intention. This particular spectator experienced a sense that it is okay not to view things in full, and her reflections on the event suggest a wild epistemology that usefully informs our subsequent experiments at these field sites. David's physical distance from us spoke to me of a significant partiality, a half-hidden and not fully seeable wildness. Perhaps animals, environments, people, and ecosystems need to not be fully seen, grasped, and understood in order for them to be what they are, where what they are always contains something unknowable. This brings me to the thought that if we are part of the environmental ecologies as opposed to somehow separated or separable from them, then we cannot ever see them in full view. We can only ever participate in ecologies and see and do from the partiality of our entangled perspectives. Engaging with entangled perspectives is important as both an artistic and ecological methodology. Donna Haraway reminds us that critters interpenetrate one another, loop around and through one another, eat each other, get indigestion, and thereby establish symbiotic arrangements that are otherwise known as cells, organisms, and ecological assemblages. Making with these symbiotic assemblages, we need to find the right kinds of stories to tell, which involves challenging ourselves to move beyond anthropocentric and discipline-bounded perspectives. This can be practiced through science art worldings, which Haraway describes as holobiomes or holoents, in which scientists, artists, ordinary members of communities, and non-human beings become enfolded in each other's projects, in each other's lives, and come to need each other in diverse, passionate, corporeal, meaningful ways. In working with ecological scientists, our aim was not simply to know as much as we could about the site. It was to enfold our own diverse knowledge practices with those of others. In so doing, we aimed to find creative ways of working across fields of knowledge. Hopfinger's suggestion that what animals, environments, people, and ecosystems are always contains something unknowable has been influential in developing this practice. The performative events that took place at NEP served to illustrate the ways in which we were drawn to those aspects of the field sites that took us into new, unexpected territories, where we were often working with unfamiliar processes. This is exemplified in a creative writing task during a third visit to the site in September 2018, when a poetic response was created to the abundance of life at NEP. This is the audio track that I think was shared before this talk. It emerged from a task in which a text was written quickly during a workshop activity in which participants were invited to spend some time writing on their own somewhere on the estate. We wrote this piece in situ, distributed across the site, and working initially on our own before entangling our voices. The text was later performed as part of an evening event with our group and subsequently recorded as part of a multi-authored poem, which eventually found its way into this audio track. It is a textual record of a multi-species, multidisciplinary approach to entanglement. And it suggests, following Kershaw, how literature and performing arts equally might evoke quotidian natural processes re-experienced through the prism of human creativity. In this case, the quotidian natural processes in question are those of predation, grazing, succession, dispersion, and decomposition, all interconnectedly comprising the shifting mosaic of our field site. Kershaw notes that given the intrinsic importance of indeterminacy and unpredictability to its workings, transdisciplinarity tends to create states which are not easily accounted for in terms of cause and effect. This means that traditional artistic outputs and discernible research findings may be inimical to the open-ended, partial, and experimental practices that are required to move within and across fields. As a result, following Kershaw, this is an anti-conclusion, which aims to keep vectors moving and resists definition. Nonetheless, our fieldwork has sharpened our thinking and methods and provides a series of potentially useful concepts for future research in this area. The key contribution of this work is to bring something back from the field into the seminar room. The result might be a rewilding of disciplinary knowledge exchange, a wild epistemology. What are the features of such a mode of production? And how does artistic research of the type disseminated here suggest a model for re-establishing wildness in the academy? A wild epistemology would be entangled, unsettling, and continually practiced. The aspiration to become enfolded in each other's projects emerges as a central rationale for our work at these sites. In fact, all of the activities that prompt the discussion in this paper can be understood as an attempt at entanglement. This is always a contingent state of being, but there are particular ways of knowing that emerge from such practices, which cannot be found within discrete disciplinary environments. This work necessitates an openness to difference and diversity, and an acceptance of the limits of knowledge. In aspiring to a transdisciplinary way of working, we undertook a careful process of enfolding ourselves within the performative processes that determine the sites, revealing and animating these through our creative practice. Many things might be productively unsettled through this work, both in the sense of enacting the unfamiliar and by posing a radical challenge to previously stable entities. A willingness and an active effort to work with the unknown is integral to this project. This can be challenging, and it does not guarantee an enjoyable, meaningful, or sensible experience. In embracing the processes of entanglement, the unpredictability of outcome is necessary, even, perhaps especially, if that causes discomfort to those who conduct and encounter the work. Our concern is with the effect of art and performance, which is to cut across disciplinary boundaries as a transdisciplinary ecological vector. This is an inherently process-based approach, which recognizes the ever-shifting constellation of trajectories that determine the places that we work within and become part of. This work is never complete, and we continue to look for new collaborators and places to continue our experiments. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, David, por esta presentación. También muchas gracias a todas y todos los que están acá conectados en este encuentro. Vamos a abrir un espacio para las preguntas, así que les pido que por favor pidan la palabra desde el chat. Y mientras llegan esas preguntas, a mí me gustaría destacar algunas cosas que me parecen muy interesantes de tu trabajo, David. Partir de esta noción del campo, claro que habitualmente lo hemos tomado como estas especies de cerco, pero que ahora podemos pensarlos como lugares porosos y podemos empezar a transitar. Y me quedan algunas como frases de lo que dijiste, como la idea de recapturar el valor de no saber ciertas cosas. Me parece que de repente partimos desde cierta certeza, especialmente como en los procesos académicos, recuperar ese lugar. Y después también, por ejemplo, pensar en esta noción de lo salvaje, que lo repetiste muchas veces y que nos puede generar algo también interesante, porque generar el campo o la vida salvaje es casi inaprensible para los sujetos como que somos hoy día, ¿no? Siempre hay como un espacio ahí de usufructo de esos lugares. Entonces, quizá, mientras vamos juntando otras preguntas, pedirte que nos amplíes un poco cómo desde la práctica artística tú entiendes ese lugar de lo salvaje, a pesar que lo enunciaste mucho, pero si lo puedes profundizar un poco, eh, principalmente en esta noción del no saber, que me parece muy disparadora e interesante.
Well, the value of the wild for me centers around this notion of unpredictable outcomes. And one thing that I learned at NEP that had happened there was that they originally had quite carefully bordered fields, which everything was ordered and conducted in a very traditional manner as arable farmland. But they started to allow the hedgerow to grow out into the field, so the borders spread. And they also introduced these animals which drive habitat change. So one example was the Tamworth pigs. The pigs churn up the soil, so they're already breaking down the nice, carefully orchestrated spaces of the field. And when they do that to the soil, certain plants can grow. So common sallow is one of the plants that can grow in that churned up soil. And that sallow is the food of these emperor butterflies, these beautiful butterflies, which started to inhabit the site. So it was never the plan to create a habitat for these butterflies. That was never part of the discussion. The original idea was just to introduce these pigs and then to see what happened. And I think that we can learn something from that as artists and researchers, because I think we too much we spend time thinking about what is it I want to make, what is it I want to find out, what is it that I want to enact. Whereas actually it can be more useful to say, what is it that I want to start? What processes do I want to put in motion? And then to just trust the journey that sets off and to see where it takes us. And that is more interesting to me if it's completely unpredictable, if it's completely unexpected. And so I've tried to learn from rewilding in the way that I set up new projects now, and to resist the temptation to clarify what the end point is going to be before we've even begun the process.
No, súper interesante escucharte y pensar también desde este contexto académico, ¿no? Ese tipo de, que donde estamos constantemente también tratando de adecuarnos o vincularnos a otros, como a la estructura de lo académico. Entonces creo que ahí hay una disputa interesante de las artes también dentro. Bueno, tenemos abierta la palabra si alguien tiene algún comentario, una pregunta. Por favor, siéntase libre de hacerla. Pueden ser en español, somos todos como hispanohablantes, creo, los que estamos acá, así que, o inglés, como quieran. Sí, no tenemos ningún comentario particular. Quizá podemos seguir como, yo tengo más preguntas mientras podemos como ir avanzando en algunas cosas. Precisamente en esta noción de la epistemología de lo salvaje, que hablaste en un momento, tú dices como el efecto del arte y la performance precisamente tiene que ver con abrazar, ¿no? Y con atravesar a través de lo multilocal, de esta multiposiciones. Y nos diste un ejemplo que era súper interesante, de todas maneras, pero ¿podrías quizá contar otras de tus experiencias o cómo a veces esos procesos chocan también con los campos disciplinares que tratan de, como de defender un saber propio, ¿no? Entonces, si nos puedes contar un poco más de cómo te ha funcionado y cómo ha sido para ti en tu camino académico y artístico esta epistemología de lo salvaje.
Yeah, so I was just interested as well in the brief mention of funding structures and applications and how this kind of way of working can fit within those structures, because I think that's a challenge, and I think that we can think usefully about developing a language to justify the unpredictability of outcome, because too often in those applications we have to say what the outcomes are going to be. But I think that if we can get good at saying that necessarily the outcome is undefined and unpredictable, then I think that we can bring funders and research assessment boards on board with this project. So that's part of the challenge. But to answer the second question, I think that the reason that this notion of working in the wild, working in wild places, resonated for me in terms of how I work in the academy was that I'd been very interested in reaching out to people that work in different schools and departments. So I'll say, oh, could I just join you for a coffee in the politics department? Or could I come and see what you're up to in quaternary science and spend a bit of time in the lab? And just allowing those very informal and tentative experimental connections to emerge. And I think if you do that enough, you start to find that there are other people in other places in the university that are excited by that idea of crossing over in that way. And if you can gather together a little team of people that have very different ways of viewing the world, maybe have different technical languages and different methodologies and different ways of doing their job, but you can come together in the same place and collectively answer some of the same questions about why are we here? What are we looking for? How can we look? And how can we talk about what we see? Then you can learn from each other. And so I think it's a transferable methodology. I don't think it's one that has to necessarily take place in wild places outside. I think it could equally take place in a seminar room, but it might be about thinking more wildly about the way that we initiate new projects and bring different collaborators together. And so when I direct theatre shows, I think I work in the same way. I get designers and experts in the subject that the play is about, and producers and audience members, and we are all coming from different places, but I think the job of the theatre director is akin to this way of doing research, which is to say that there are many, many different expertises and perspectives in the room. And my job is to somehow try to find a way to bring that together into a shared project, to get people excited about working together towards something, even as we remain open to that final result being completely unpredictable and only possible through the combination of those different perspectives, which might include non-human perspectives, rather than thinking we know what we're doing, because we only know what we're doing individually, and even then we don't really. But when you start collaborating on a bigger scale, you really can't predict the way that the project's going to go. And so I think it's about embracing that as a virtue rather than being afraid of it.
Gracias, me parece muy como estimulador. Primero la idea de mostrarse vulnerable y poder decir, estamos aquí para saber y para eso tengo que reconocer que no sé. Creo que hay como un paso. Y también lo que decías de que esta metodología, hay una forma de hacer que tiene que ver con las prácticas artísticas, pero que se puede transmitir o transferir a diferentes espacios. Creo que eso nos dispara muchas ideas y formas de una multidisciplina como real, no así como de palabra o de formulario. Macarena Andrews ha pedido la palabra, así que se la voy a ceder.
Gracias. Oh, no. David.
I was just going to say that idea of people feeling uncomfortable is really important, because I think that, I think it's about embracing that and acknowledging that from the beginning, that actually this might be an uncomfortable experience. We might feel out of our comfort zone. We might feel a bit confused and a bit unwilling to go down certain routes. But you can always find people in any discipline who are excited by that rather than resistant to it. And so just knowing that we will all feel a bit uncomfortable at some point is probably a good thing to build into the way that these conversations begin. Yeah.
Bueno, yo puedo hablar en español, Pía, y David le sale el subtítulo. ¡Qué emocionante! La primera vez en la vida. Yo, bueno, encuentro muy interesante lo que propones tú en términos de la metáfora del campo. El campo en los lugares salvajes, el campo disciplinar, el campo de trabajo, los estudios de campo etnográfico. Creo que es una metáfora muy fecunda para poder pensar los distintos planos donde podemos ejercer nuestro trabajo. Eh, y creo que es muy desafiante en esta metáfora que hablabas de lo lleno de barro, de los bordes que se expanden, que es muy difícil porque yo siento que en la academia estamos cada vez más forzados a ser específicos y excelentes en algo muy concreto, que tiene límites. Entonces me atrajo mucho porque me acordé de este concepto del espacio liso de Deleuze y Guattari, donde uno va avanzando por referencia al lugar inmediato, que a mí me encanta, y creo que ahí uno puede ir cruzando fronteras casi sin darse cuenta. Y creo que tiene relación con lo que planteé. Como yo te conozco hace más años, quería preguntarte cómo habías llegado a esto de Wild Performance desde Making Roots, porque vi que el testimonio que ponías de la observadora de tu performance salía bajo Making Roots, y en esta idea de hacer las rutas, de encontrar los caminos, ¿cómo ha sido estos 10 años de trabajo para llegar a esta performance de lo salvaje?
The journey into this project was appropriately quite random and unplanned. So I was reading a book. It's called Feral, and it's by George Monbiot, and it's about rewilding. And I just got excited about it from a very amateur perspective. And I happened to mention it to somebody who I was working on an arts board with in the west coast of Scotland. And she happened to be the mother of Jamie Lorimer, who's a geographer at Oxford University, who's a specialist on rewilding. And so I just got in touch with Jamie Lorimer and said, can we meet up for a cup of coffee? I'd love to hear about your work. And during that conversation, we just got excited about creative, performance-based playing around with the ideas that he had been researching for all this time. And he happened to have a contact at NEP. He knew Charles and Isabel who owned the estate and had been there once before. And so we just applied for a little pot of money and managed to go down there and started playing and started exploring. And that just gradually led to the next thing and then the next thing, and the project grew and started involving new people. And I've never really planned what I wanted the project to be because it feels wrong. So I've just trusted the process and gone from one thing to the next and taken up opportunities as they've presented themselves, just like being here today. I've often found that that tends to lead to new strands for the project that I haven't planned. So that was the journey. And you said something about the messiness of that approach, which I think is why the metaphor of the field works so well, because on all of these trips, we literally got muddy. One time we were completely soaked and covered in mud. So it felt like we were allowing ourselves to step outside the safety of our disciplinary worlds and entering into a messier, more dangerous and muddy space. And I really want to make it clear that I'm not suggesting that disciplines shouldn't continue. I think that it's really important that we do have experts in specific fields who really know their stuff and conduct rigorous and systematic research using established methodologies. But I just think that all of those people would benefit from having a little bit of space where they get muddy, where they go outside that and just play around a little bit, because they'll always come back into their own disciplines having shifted their perspective, maybe taken something from somebody else's work, or thought differently about the phenomenon that they are studying. And so, yeah, I think this is really a plea for us all to just be willing to get a bit muddy. in our work.
Bueno, tenemos acá un comentario de Paola. No sé, Paola, si lo quieres hacer con micrófono o lo leo yo. No me responde Paola. Pero Paola dice, muy interesante lo salvaje.
Estoy.
Ah, ahí estás, Paola. Dale, te escuchamos.
Solo en voz, en todo caso.
Dale.
Bueno, escuchándolo, me parece realmente muy interesante cómo define lo salvaje o esta epistemología salvaje. A mí me hace pensar mucho cómo trabajamos, en mi investigación yo realizo un trabajo colaborativo, artístico, que tiene algunas similitudes con lo que tú planteas, por lo menos en lo situado y en el tipo de trabajo que emerge y que comparte esta incertidumbre total, esta messiness, esta confusión, que son bien propias, ¿no?, de ciertas aplicaciones del teatro o del teatro aplicado, y también de la practice as research como marco metodológico, ¿no? Que ha sido algo que hemos estado discutiendo mucho en este último tiempo dentro del programa de doctorado. Entonces, quisiera preguntarte justamente por cómo te diferencias o te asimilas con estos dos campos disciplinares, con el Applied Theater y Practice as Research como campo metodológico.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I think that one thing to say is that we are so output driven. So the expectation embarking on a new research project seems to always be, where are you going to publish? What funding application are you going to put together as a result of this work? And I think that where the parallel between applied theatre and practice as research and this kind of wild work can be found is in just making a really strong argument that we can spend the time and the detail in setting up the project, but just really arguing for the value of staying at that beginning stage for a bit longer and developing those initial starting points. So for an applied theatre project, it might be about really strengthening the connection with a community or with a particular venue or organization where a project's going to begin. And it might be about working collaboratively to develop the kinds of questions and methodologies rather than starting already knowing what the questions and methodologies are going to be. I think that's where it can be quite difficult and different to our usual way of working. So the same might apply to practice as research, where it's about the starting point, the stimulus, the situation of the work, rather than it being about what's going to come out of this. I don't know if that was a very good answer to that excellent question, but yeah, I mean, I can definitely see some really clear parallels between applied theatre and this sort of work, and I'd love to think further about that, because I think that actually enhancing the applied theatre side of this project is where I would love to take it next, and start involving different community groups in this work, rather than it feeling like a project for this elite group of academics who have managed to get some money to go for a nice little holiday in the countryside. I think it's about recognizing the human and non-human communities that are stakeholders in the places that we work, and meaningfully finding ways to involve them in our journey. So yeah, thank you for that. I will think more about those points of connection.
Thank you, David.
Bien, muchas gracias, David. No sé si Paola tiene todavía otro comentario. Ahí Manuel está preguntándote por el chat si puedes repetir el nombre del autor que nombraste antes, así que quizás nos lo puedes compartir. A propósito, si no tenemos otro comentario, alguien que quiera tomar la palabra, a mí me gustaría como tomarme un poco de lo último que nos dijiste sobre esta idea de reforzar la experiencia con la comunidad, reconocer a las comunidades humanas y no humanas. Y pienso que quizás nos podrías contar un poquito más de cómo han tenido repercusión esta metodología, estos trabajos en otros campos, a propósito de campos, ¿no? Tanto como para las personas que han participado de ellas y que vienen de la ecología o de otros lugares, o para estas comunidades, pensando en una discusión que he escuchado algunas veces, por ejemplo, a María José Contreras, que está acá, que también ella obviamente se dedica a la performance, que muchas veces desde otros campos del saber se piensa el arte como algo que está subyugado como a la difusión de un cierto conocimiento y no a la producción realmente de metodologías consistentes para generar nuevos conocimientos. Entonces, que nos cuentes simplemente de tu experiencia y de lo que ha pasado.
One of the collaborators that we started this project with is Danielle Shreve, who's a paleoecologist. And she has a site for excavation in the south of England where they're uncovering many fossils from the last 250 million years. And that site has historically been quite a specialist area for work. One of the outcomes of the project is that Danielle's openness to working with artists and with different community groups and with people working in different fields like human geography seems to have really been enhanced and expanded by working in this way. So that means that that site now feels more like a place where different people can come together and explore the finds and also start working with the findings in new ways. So artworks have been created from the fossils that have been uncovered, and human geography researchers have come to work with Danielle on that site. So I think that's a good example of one of the ways in which a project like this can really affect the way that an individual researcher starts to think about what they can do and how they can broaden the possibly closed world of their research into something more connective and relational and sociable and collaborative. So I think that plays out in two ways. One is in how the work is disseminated. So the findings of that scientific project can reach a wider audience by taking place in different forms and through different media. But the other is the kind of philosophical and theoretical ways of thinking about the work that can be really informed by opening up the possibilities of borrowing from ideas from performance or from environmentalism or from conservation practices, and bringing those to bear on the approach to scientific research. So yeah, I think it's about looking for opportunities to reach out further and to find new avenues and new perspectives on a project. And I think that can really clearly happen in lots of different fields, and not necessarily just through the involving artists, which is always, I think, seen as a little bit of a kind of left field novelty approach to a very serious research project. But I think that if we can make the argument that artistic research is about more than dissemination, it's about more than just connecting to publics in new and exciting ways. It's also about shifting the way that people think about the research questions that they're asking and the ways that they might address those questions. Then we're having an effect. Then this works and doing what it needs to do, which is about opening up experience and allowing people to think differently about what they were doing already.
Muchas gracias, David. No sé si tienes un comentario final o si alguien quiere hacer un comentario de cierre. ¿No?
I would just like to say that collectively, please do stay in touch, because it's so exciting to me that a project that really had such a tiny little origin in that chance meeting with the mother of the geographer who I've come to work with, could actually have led to me connecting across continents in this new digital world. And so I would love to just stay in touch and see how your work might involve others and make connections across the world in this way. And I also just really enjoyed the fact that I saw that stag. There was a brief picture of that stag in the field, which I really remember that very meaningful encounter with, just staring at me across the field at NEP. And that then I made that silly little performance gesture with the sticks in the field, which Sarah Hopfinger then wrote about, which really helped us think a bit more. And that then with these two pieces of wood here, that I did that during the talk. And now that stag and that tiny little encounter with that stag has connected to people in Chile. And the stag doesn't know that, but I just think that's really beautiful, that the moments like that can grow and expand and find new points of connection that could never ever have been predicted. So I think that's what events like this are all about, is just, we don't know it's going to lead to anything, but it's entirely possible that it might. And I think that if we all just stay open to that in the way that we work and in the meetings that we have and the connections that we make, then it keeps academia exciting and unpredictable and messy. And that's what I'm all about.
Super, creo que es muy inspirador y que nos llena como de ideas y de ganas, así que sumarnos a la invitación de seguir conectados, todos ahí te agradecen mucho esta conexión. Yo también, muy particularmente, me parece desafiante, y creo que también hay algo importante que es que está dando vuelta en todo lo que dijiste, que tiene que ver como con el afecto también, con el deseo, con la vulnerabilidad, y me gusta pensar que podemos trabajar desde ahí. Así que nada, esperamos seguir en contacto. Te agradecemos mucho nuevamente, agradecemos a todos quienes han participado, y aprovechamos de dejar los invitados para el próximo coloquio, que va a ser el viernes que sigue. Justamente Macarena Andrews va a presentar su trabajo de investigación, y que sigan, ¿verdad?, informados de lo que está pasando. Así que muchas gracias.